Snow drifted hard across the ridge. Wind cutting like judgment. Cabin dark. Only one log left on the stack. Then, movement in the dusk. A widow, half frozen, bent over his woodpile, stealing warmth to stay alive. Her body shaking too hard to finish the theft. Knees giving out. Collapse against the last log he owned. Breath fogging. Hands trembling over that stolen hope. And if you want to hear how this desperate soul found salvation, stay until the very end. Snow rose in hard sheets the moment she left the broken wagon behind. Wind clawed at her shawl. Ice stung her cheeks. Night pressing close. She had no choice but to walk. 1 mile. Maybe less. But her body felt hollowed out by the journey. Boots sinking into drifts. Breath thinning to threads. Her hands numb around the small bundle of matches she had carried since morning. Useless now. The storm had eaten every spark. Her steps dragged through the dark timberline. Branches whipping. Snow swallowing the path. No tracks behind her. The wind erased everything. She pushed forward anyway. A ridge rose ahead. Sharp. Unforgiving. She climbed in on shaking legs. Slipped twice. Caught herself once. Lost balance the second time and stayed on her knees longer than she meant to. Cold creeping up her arms. She forced herself upright. A frozen world turning in slow circles around her. Then, light. A faint amber flicker far across the valley. A cabin window. One glow in the dark. She moved toward it. Half limping. Half falling. Snow pushing against her back like a living thing. Her breath rattled. Chest tight. Vision narrowing. The land sloped downward. Then flattened. Fence posts leaned along the pasture line. She touched one for balance. Wood colder than bone. Another step. Another. Her knees shaking wildly. She crossed into the yard. Saw the woodpile. Small. Nearly gone. Only one log left on top. She hesitated. Her cracked lips parted in a soundless plea. Storm closing in. Cold gnawing deeper. No time. She reached for that last log. Her fingers barely obeying. She tried to lift it. Tried to pull it toward her chest. Her strength failed. Her arms buckled. She dropped hard against the wood pile. Snow puffed around her. She sagged over the log like a fallen branch. Breath fogging weakly. Almost gone. Bootsteps behind her. Slow. Measured. A door opened. Warm air brushed the back of her neck. Fire scent drifting out. She didn't look up. Couldn't. The cowboy stood above her. Tall. Silent. Studying the shape she made in the snow. No questions. No judgment. Only a long breath as he reached down. He lifted the last log from beneath her shaking hands. Set it gently into her arms. Not taking it away. Giving it back. Acceptance without a word. He stepped aside. Left the doorway open. Warmth spilling out on a slow ribbon across the snow. Inviting her in. She held the log like a lifeline. And crawled toward the heat before the storm finished her. Warmth breathed out as she crawled across the threshold. A thin ribbon of heat. Flickering. Fragile. Not meant for two. He let her cross anyway. Door staying open just long enough for her to clear the frame. Then he shut out the cold with one firm push. Wind died behind the timber. Silence settling like dust. Her body slumped near the hearth. Arms still wrapped around the log he'd given back to her. A trembling grip. Knuckles white. He knelt beside her. Not touching. Just close enough to take the log from her hands. Set it onto the stove's iron lip. A micro-action. A wordless offering of survival. Heat deepened. The ember inside the stove blanched. Thud. Then caught the wood he'd placed. A bloom of orange. A soft crackle. Warmth beginning its slow crawl into the room. Her shoulders shook. Not from cold now. From trying not to collapse again. He stood. Moved quietly across the cabin. Bootsteps muted on old floorboards. He fetched a wool blanket from the cot. Held it over her for a moment as if gauging whether she'd shy away. She didn't move. He draped it around her. Heavy. Scratchy. Perfect. Her breath loosened. Steam rising from her sleeves. Snow melting into puddles at her knees. He stepped back toward the hearth. Tossed another small piece of wood inside. Fire brightened. Heat flushing the shadows deeper into the corners of the cabin. Outside, wind howled against the shutters. A reminder. The storm wasn't done with her. Not even close. She tried to steady herself against the floor. Arms weak. Palms slipping. He crouched again. Slid one steady arm beneath her. Lifted her by inches. Moved her closer to the fire. Set her down on a folded rug. Still without words. She felt the warmth radiating into her bones. Slow. Deep. Dangerous, because it made her remember what safety felt like. Her eyes fluttered shut. But a memory cut through. A flash of a man's silhouette at the top of a staircase. A voice dripping with charm and threat. Her breath hitched. She forced her eyes open. The cowboy was at the stove. Back to her. Stirring something in a tin pot. Not the same silhouette. Not the same world. But the fear lingered. He reached for a wooden cup. Poured warm broth. Walked it to her with slow steps, giving her time to see every movement coming. He crouched again. Offered the cup. Held it out. Didn't insist. Didn't push. She took it with unsteady fingers. The heat seeped into her palms. Lifted to her lips. Broth salty, simple, perfect. It slid into the hollow she called her stomach. Quiet strength filling places that had been empty too long. He watched for a moment. Not studying. Just confirming she wasn't fading. Then he stood and moved across the cabin again. A slow, methodical man. A habit of tending things. He took her coat. Held it near the fire. Steam rose off it like ghosts sleeting. He checked the seams. Noted the tears. Walked to a drawer. Pulled needle and thread. Sat by the table, and began stitching. Small, tight lines. Repair without comment. She watched him through half-lidded eyes. Trying to understand a man who used silence as shelter. Outside, the storm slammed again. A branch scraped the roof. A sharp reminder of pursuit. Of how far danger could reach. She flinched. He didn't look up, but he paused mid-stitch. Just long enough for her to know he heard it too. That he understood. He finished the coat. Carried it back to her. Placed it, gently, over the blanket. A layering of care. She tried to speak. Nothing came out but a rasp. He didn't press her for words. He pointed instead, one slow gesture, toward the cot. An invitation to rest. Not a command. Not ownership. Just space to breathe. She shook her head at first. Fear sparking again. A memory of rooms she'd been forced into. Of doors locked from the outside. He understood that too. He took his bedroll. Laid it out near the door. Sat on it. Facing the room. Facing her. A silent promise. You sleep. I keep watch. She swallowed hard. Cold trembling fading. Warmth rising in waves. She shifted closer to the cot. Pulled herself up onto it inch by inch. Blanket wrapped tight. Fire painting the walls with soft gold. Her breath eased. But another shadow stirred in her memory. The antagonist's hand slamming against a doorframe. The way he'd smiled as she backed away. She curled tighter beneath the blanket. The cowboy didn't turn. But his posture changed. Shoulders squared. Head dangled toward the door as if he sensed a threat he couldn't name yet. He tossed another log into the stove. Heat surged. Warmth grew steadier. He stayed seated. Back to the wood. Front to the storm. Guarding a stranger with the patience of someone who had guarded things alone for a long time. The fire cracked. Her eyes dimmed. Her heartbeat softened. Inside that small cabin, warmth finally outweighed the cold. But the storm outside reminded them both. Safety was only temporary. Someone out there still wanted her back. And the thaw inside this cabin had only just begun. Dawn leaked slowly through the frost-rimmed window. A thin line of gold. Soft. Hesitant. The kind of light that asked permission before entering. She stirred on the cot. Blanket pulled high. Breath steady but shallow. The cowboy rose from his place near the door. Boot steps quiet. Measured. He moved toward the stove. Fed the fire with a small piece of wood. The warmth climbed again, filling the cabin in gentle waves. He checked her without leaning too close. Just a shift of his gaze. A small nod at the steady rise of her chest. Her eyelids fluttered. Half waking. Half drifting. He poured water from the kettle. Steam rose. A warm curl against the cold morning air. He set the cup on the table. Turned toward her. Waited until she blinked, fully awake. She tried to sit. Blanket sliding. Her sleeve slipped with it. A bruise. Dark. Old enough to yellow at the edges. Fresh enough to ache. He froze. Not with shock. With recognition. A man who knew what harm looked like. She tugged the blanket back up. Too late. The truth had already spoken. He didn't move toward her. Didn't reach out. Just stepped to the side to give her space. Then added another log to the fire. Warmth building again. Softening the cold air that clung to her like memory. She lowered her gaze. Guilt flickering across her face. As if she had done wrong by surviving. The cowboy returned to the table. Pulled her coat closer. Checked the stitching he'd done the night before. Ran a thumb over the torn lining. Inside he found something. A slip of paper. Folded tight. Nearly forgotten. He hesitated. Then set it on the table where she could see it. Not opening it. Not claiming it. Her eyes widened with dread. She reached for it slowly. Hands trembling. She held it to her chest. Pressed it there like a warning not to be read aloud. He understood it enough to look away. Let privacy return to her. Warmth pressed against the shutters. But cold memory moved through her ribcage. Her breath stuttered. A flash behind her eyes. A hand gripping her arm. A voice whispering poison. A smile that looked like kindness until it wasn't. She winced. He noticed. He walked to the stove. Poured broth. Set it beside her on the small stoolie. A micro-action. An offering. No questions. No judgment. Only warmth she could choose to accept. She lifted the cup. Her sleeve slipped again. Another bruise. Worse. Shaped like someone else's fingers. She flinched. Not from pain. From being seen. He didn't look at the bruise directly. He looked at the stove instead. Fire humming. Flame steady. A quiet gesture of respect. Your body is your story. Tell it when you decide. The wind outside shifted. A cold gust. Snow tapping against the window pane. A shadow passed across the glass. She startled hard. Cup clattering against the stoolie. The cowboy turned sharply toward the window. Hand hovering near the rifle leaning against the wall. But the shadow moved on. Just drifting snow. Just the storm shifting shapes. Still, her reaction told him more than words ever could. Threat wasn't memory alone. Threat had a name. A face. And it haunted her. He lowered his hand from the rifle. Returned to her side. Not too close. Just near enough that she could feel someone solid anchoring the room. Her breath steadied. Slow. Uneven. Human. He lifted her coat again. Turned it. Checked the seams for more damage. Something slipped from the inner pocket. A small cloth pouch. He caught it before it hit the floor. Set it on the table. Stepped back. Waited. She stared at the pouch. Shaking her head. Not wanting to touch it. Not wanting to remember what was inside. He didn't open it. Didn't ask. But the way she curled it on herself. He told him enough. A reminder of the storm outside thudded against the door. Wind rattling the hinges. Snow piling higher. Cold creeping along the threshold as if someone waiting out there might reach for her again. He moved to the door. Secured the latch. A quiet click. A barrier against the world. Her shoulders loosened. Just a fraction. He returned to the fire. Shifted the logs. Coked the flames brighter. Warmth expanded. Pushing the cold back into the corners. She pulled the blanket higher. Rolled the bruise beneath the wool. But she couldn't hide the way her hand trembled. He saw it. Recognized it. A trembling not from cold. But from a wound carved deeper than skin. He sat on the stool a few paces away. Not looming. Not claiming. Just present. A steady figure carved in firelight. She watched him through swollen eyes. Saw no anger. No impatience. Only a man who understood broken things without demanding they explain themselves. Wind rose again. Cold clawing at the roof. A reminder. The storm wasn't the danger. It was what she ran from. And whoever had marked her body like a map. He wasn't finished yet. The cowboy shifted slightly. Reaching for another log. Feeding the fire. Keeping the warmth alive. Keeping her alive. A wordless vowels forming in the quiet space between them. Here, you heal. Here, the cold does not win. Morning settled slowly over the cabin, warm where it touched the walls, cold where it lingered near the floor. The widow lay awake on the cot. Blanket tied around her. Eyes open but unfocused. Breath fogging faintly in the chilly corners of the room. The cowboy moved with quiet purpose. Stirring the coals. Bringing the fire back to life. A soft bloom of orange spread across the hearth. Heat rising. Chasing shadows upward. She watched him from behind the blanket. Still unsure of her place. Still bracing for a voice raised or a hand lifted. He offered neither. Only warmth. Only steadiness. Then, a soft shuffle near the door. Claws clicking faintly on the wood. His old ranch dog stepped into the light. Gray-muzzled. Broad-shouldered. Eyes weary from a lifetime of earning trust the hard way. The dog paused. Studied her. Head tilted. Tail still. The widow tensed. Her body stiffened under the blanket. The cowboy noticed. He shifted one step toward the dog. A subtle guard. Not pushing the dog forward. Not pulling him back. Just letting the moment choose its own shape. The dog sniffed the air. Inched closer. Slow. Careful. Warm breath puffing against the cold morning draft. She flinched. Barely. A reflex born of old harm. The dog stopped. Sat down. Tail thumped once. Then twice. A patient rhythm. An offering of peace. The cowboy exhaled softly. Shoulders easing. He poured warm milk into a tin bowl. Set it near the cot. The dog looked at him. Then at her. Then padded forward. The widow's hand tightened around the blanket. Muscles taut. Her breath caught like a snag thread. The dog lowered his head. Lapped once. Twice. Then nudged the bowl a little closer to her. A small gesture. An invitation she didn't understand yet. But it loosened something inside her. Her pulse slowed. Just a little. Warmth from the fire brushed her cheek. A soft reminder the world could be gentle. Wind rattled a window. Snow scratched along the shutter. Danger whispering from the outside world. She jerked. The dog lifted his head instantly. Pressed closer to Hernie. Guarding without being asked. The cowboy noticed the way her fear rose again. He stepped toward the window. Checked the latch. Checked the drifts outside. The storm still heavy. But no footsteps. No silhouettes. The threat lived mostly in her memory. For now. He returned to the hearth. Shifted the logs. Flames climbed higher. Warmth pushed deeper across the room. The widow inhaled.
Slow.
Uneven. But real. The dog rested his head on the edge of the cot. Close enough she could feel the weight of his presence. She reached out without thinking. Stopped halfway. Fear tightening her wrist. Not of the dog. Of trusting anything with teeth again. The dog didn't move. Just waited. A steady warmth radiated from his body. A counterweight to the cold gripping her thoughts. Finally, she touched him. Fingertips brushing his fur. The dog leaned into the touch. Pressed his warmth into her hand. A soft sound escaped her. Half a gasp. Half a sob. The cowboy paused with a fire poker. Turned just enough to see her hand resting on the dog's head. A quiet shift passed through him. Something small. Something deep. Something he didn't show on his face. He went back to tending the fire. Letting the moment belong to them. The widow stroked the dog's fur. Slow. Uncertain. Tears glazed her eyes, but she blinked them back. The dog nudged closer. Accepted her sorrow as if it were part of the morning. No judgment. No confusion. Just presence. A soft thump of his tail echoed across the floorboards. Warm. Steady. Alive. She laughed once. A broken sound. Barely there. But it warmed the room with something no fire could give. The cowboy heard it. Did not turn. Did not intrude. But his grip on the poker softened. His shoulders lowered. And for the first time since she arrived, the cabin felt like a place that held more than survival. Another gust slammed the door. A cold reminder. The world outside still circled. Still hunted. Still waited. The dog lifted his head. Growled, low, protective, instinctive. The cowboy stepped toward the sound. Checked the latch again. Pressed his palm to the door. A quiet promise of vigilance. She watched him. Saw the line of his back framed by firelight. Sturdy. Unmoving. A man who didn't run from storms. The dog settled again. Rested against her side. Warmth seeping through the blanket. Her shoulders eased. A slow throb along her spine. She whispered something. Too soft for words. The dog heard. Shifted closer. And in that simple leaning wait, trust began. Found family sparked. And for the first time since the world turned against her, she felt the faint outline of belonging. Inside the cabin, warmth grew. Outside, the cold circled. But she was no longer facing it alone. Midday light spilled across the snow. Bright. Too bright. A warning in its own way. The widow sat near the hearth, legs tucked beneath the blanket, the dog curled at her feet. Heat rolled gently from the stove. Safe warmth. Soft warmth. A warmth she hadn't known in months. The cowboy stood near the table. Sharpening a small knife. Methodical strokes. Steady rhythm. The scrape of steel against stone filled the quiet cabin. Then, a sound outside. Hoofbeats. Measured. Confident. Not the hurried gait of a traveler escaping the storm. But the slow, unhurried cadence of someone who believed the world owed him its attention. The dog's ears pricked. A low growl rumbled in his chest. The widow froze. Breath trapped high in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. The cowboy stopped sharpening the knife. Listened. Another hoofbeat. Then the soft jingle of reins. Someone dismounted outside. Snow shifted under polished boots. A shadow crossed the frosted window. Tall. Precise. Unthreatened by the cold. Her heart stumbled. Memory slammed into her, a hand gripping her arm. A voice thick with honeyed poison. A smile that promised protection while delivering ruin. She pressed a hand over her ribs. Breath shaking. The cowboy moved to the door. Not rushing. Not panicked. Just anchoring himself between her and the world. He opened the door halfway. Cold rushed in. A man stood outside. Well dressed. Coat tailored. Hat untouched by wind. Gloves spotless. He smiled with the kind of charm that rotted beneath the surface. Eyes sweeping the cabin with an easy claim. Neighborly visit, he said, voice warm enough to thaw ice. But the warmth didn't reach his eyes. The cowboy didn't answer. Just stepped enough into the doorway to block the man's line of sight in sight. A silent wall. The charming monster tilted his head. Peered past the cowboy's shoulder. Saw movement. Saw a blanket. Saw her. His smile widened. But his pupils sharpened like a blade. Well now, he murmured, didn't expect to find my missing girl here. Missing girl. The words sliced through the warm cabin like a knife dipped in frost. She flinched hard. The dog growled louder. The cowboy shifted. Only a fraction. But enough to widen the barrier. The man lifted gloved hands in a gesture of innocence. Misunderstanding is all, he said. Voice honey sweet. Tone soft enough to poison an entire room. She has spells. Frightens easy. Runs off. I'm here to bring her home. Home. The word made her stomach recoil. The cabin felt suddenly smaller. The warmth thinner. The fire dimmer. She bowed her head, trying to steady her breath. Trying not to be pulled back into that old life. The cowboy said nothing. His silence weighed more than any argument. The charming monster stepped closer. Boots crunching on new snow. Surprised she made it this far. His eyes flicked over her. The bruises. The trembling. The way she held herself like something hunted. He masked his satisfaction with a sigh. She's unwell, he added lightly. Loses track of reality. Makes wild claims. You understand. It wasn't a request. It was a script he had used many times. A performance crafted to turn crowds in his favor. The cowboy didn't move. Didn't blink. Just tightened his grip on the door slightly. The charming monster chuckled. Come now. You can't mean to keep her. He leaned closer. Lowered his voice. She's trouble. The widow's breath hitched again. Her memories flickered. The staircase. The slammed door. The whispered threats wrapped in a gentleman's tone. The cowboy disengaged the hinge latch with one subtle twist. Not closing the door. Not opening it wider. Just reinforcing the boundary. You've got the wrong impression, the charming monster said, trying another angle. She belongs with me. The widow whispered a broken no. Barely audible. But the cowboy heard it. He angled his stance. A barrier. A statement. The charming monster's smile thinned. Let's not start a disagreement, he said. Cold leaking into the warm words. People in town know me. They trust me. They'll take my word over hers. Another gust of wind slammed against the cabin. Cold rattling like bones. The thread outside blending with the thread at the door. The dog barked once, sharp, fierce. The charming monster flinched. His mask cracked for a heartbeat. Inside the cabin, heat pulsed stronger. Fire throwing defiant light across the cowboy's shoulders. He stood unmovable. The widow rose slightly on the cot. Blanket slipping from her shoulders. Strength trembling beneath the fear. She met the charming monster's eyes. For the first time since she fled. "No," she whispered again. Stronger. Clearer. The cowboy didn't need more. He pushed the door shut. Firm. Final. Cold sliced off. Warmth sealed in. The latch clicked. The dog pressed close to her leg. The fire grew louder. The threat outside waited. But inside, for the first time, she wasn't facing him alone. Snow blew sideways across the yard the next morning. Sharp. Unsettled. As if the storm itself sent something circling closer. Inside, the cabin held its fragile warmth. Fire humming. Air thick with the smell of wood smoke and morning broth. The widow sat near the stove, shoulders wrapped in the repaired coat. The dog rested against her boots. The cowboy stood by the window, watching the tree line. Waiting. He felt it before he saw it. A ripple in the quiet. A disturbance in the cold. Then, hoof beats again. But not alone this time. Two horses. Voices muted by frost. A scrape of leather. The widow's breath caught. Her fingers closed around a blanket as if bracing for impact. The cowboy moved to the door. Position steady. Expression unreadable. The knock came soft. Polite. Practiced. The kind of knock used by men who believed refusal was impossible. He opened the door a narrow width. Cold slashed through the gap. Standing there was the charming monster. Beside him, the local deputy. Badge gleaming. Face apologetic in a way that implied he'd already chosen which story to believe. "Morning," the antagonist said warmly. Too warmly. Almost kindly. "I feared we ended on the wrong foot yesterday." The cowboy didn't answer. His silence stretched like iron between them. The deputy cleared his throat. "Got some papers brought in from town," he said. Voiced in with uncertainty. The antagonist lifted a neat envelope. Cream-colored. Edges crisp. The kind of paper men used when they wanted lies to look official. "Just a little clarification," he said gently. "For her well-being." The widow pressed into the wall. A tremor ran through her legs. The dog growled deep enough the floor vibrated. The cowboy blocked the doorway. One solid shape against the cold. The antagonist continued smiling. Slid the papers toward him. "Medical affidavits," he said. "Statements of instability. Proof she's unfit to make decisions. The doctor confirmed it last month." The cowboy didn't reach for the papers. Didn't move at all. The antagonist shrugged. A casual gesture designed to hide the hook. "I only want to take her home," he said. "To keep her safe." Safe. The word twisted in the widow's gut. A memory rose. Her wrist in his grasp. Her voice dismissed. Her pain explained away his imagination. Her mouth opened soundlessly. Fear swallowing the words. The deputy shifted uneasily. "Look," he murmured, "if these papers are right, she's under his care by law." Law. Another weapon. Another chain. The cowboy finally spoke. One low word. Flat. Wrong. The antagonist's smile tightened. He held out another page. A neat column of debt. Her debt. Signed under duress months ago. "Legally," he said softly, "she owes me." She ran before completing her obligations. The widow flinched as if struck. Heat drained from her face. Her breath trembled. The dog pressed closer to her legs. The cowboy didn't look at the papers. Didn't he too? He watched her instead. Watched the way her hands shook. Watched the bruise along her wrist darken with remembered fear. He stepped 1 inch farther into the doorway. Snow dusted his boots. Wind tore at his coat. But he stayed fixed. Unmoving. The antagonist leaned forward. Lowered his voice. "You're being misled," he whispered. "She twists stories. Always has. She imagines harm where there is none. The widow closed her eyes. A tear escaped. The cowboy's jaw tightened. The antagonist shifted tactics. "Think about your reputation," he said lightly. "Sheltering a woman declared mentally unfit? Folks in town look to me. I can help you avoid trouble if you simply step aside." Another gust slammed the shutters. Cold rattled across the walls like skeletal fingers. A warning. A reminder of the danger still gnawing outside. The cowboy didn't move. His silence carved the air. The deputy glanced nervously from one man to the other. Maybe she should come out," he said softly. "Let me speak with her." The widow pressed back harder. Head shaking. Eyes wide. The dog bared his teeth. The antagonist's smile sharpened. He shifted closer. "Come along," he called gently. "As your guardian, I insist." Her breath hitched. She whispered, "No." Barely audible. But the cowboy heard it like thunder. He stepped fully into the doorway now, shoulders squared, blocking every inch of entry. Warm cabin behind him. Cold world before him. "No," he echoed. The antagonist's eyes hardened. For the first time, the veneer slipped. "You don't know what you're interfering with," he hissed. "I'm giving you a chance to avoid consequences." The cowboy didn't blink. Didn't waver. His voice came quiet. Steady. "No papers. No lies. She stays." Snow whipped across the porch. Cold flooding in like the world itself inhaled. The antagonist stared at him. Smiled gone. Eye sharp as ice. "This isn't over," he said. His tone honeyed again. Low. Threat wrapped in velvet. He turned. Mounted his horse. The deputy followed, uncertain but bound by law. Hoofbeats faded into the storm. The cowboy closed the door. Warmth sealed the cabin again. The latch clicked. The widow sagged into the wall. Shaking. Terrified. Relieved. The dog climbed onto her lap. Pressed all his weight against her chest. She clung to him. Fire crackled louder. Heat gathering. The cowboy stood by the door. Back straight. Face carved from shadows and amber light. The line had tightened. The law had been wielded. But inside the warmth, she was still safe. For now. Evening settled early. A blue-gray hush across the valley. Cold pressing at the shutters like something trying to get in. Inside, the fire held its ground. Heat shifting in small waves. Soft. Steady. But the warmth couldn't quiet the fear trembling along her spine. The widow sat on the cot. Hands clasped tight. Knuckle was pale. The dog pressed against her boots. A living anchor. The cowboy stood near the table, cleaning a lantern. Slow motions. Grounding motions. His presence shaping the space without speaking. She watched him from beneath lowered lashes. Breathing shallow. Shaking faintly. The lies from the doorway still rang in her ears. Unfit. Unwell. Imagining harm where there was none. She swallowed hard. The fire popped. A spark jumped. She flinched. The dog lifted his head, nudged her knee. Warm reassurance against the cold memory clawing at her ribs. The cowboy paused mid-motion. Turned slightly. Not asking. Just waiting. Her fingers tightened. She felt the moment rise. A moment she'd avoided for years. Words wanting out. A story long suffocated. She opened her mouth. No sound came. Only breath. Then. Uncertain. The cowboy lowered the lantern. Set it gently on the table. He didn't move closer. He didn't crowd her. He just stilled. Giving the air space to hold whatever she could manage. The fire warmed one side of her face. Cold memory burned the other. She tried again. This time a word formed. Small. Scared. Please. The cowboy's eyebrows shifted a fraction. Not confusion. Recognition. As if he'd been waiting for that single syllable. Her throat closed. Tears blurred the room. "I need to tell you," she whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. He remained silent. A quiet oath. "Speak. I will not interrupt." The dog climbed partly onto the cot, settled his weight against her hip. She exhaled shakily. And the truth began. At first, he was kind. Her words trembled, fell like weak snowflakes struggling to reach the ground. He said I was safe with him. She wiped her eyes. Breath hitched. He told everyone how fragile I was, how he was taking care of me. The cowboy's jaw tightened. Firelight sharpened the lines of his face. She pulled the blanket tighter. Cold seeped through her memories like winter water under a door. He'd locked doors, she said softly. Call it protection. Her voice thinned to a thread. Tell me I misremembered things. Tell me stories he knew weren't true. She touched the bruise on her wrist. The skin still tender. He'd leave marks, then say I fell. The dog growled low. A deep rumble of solidarity. She continued. He kept records, papers, things that made him look like the caretaker and me like... She swallowed. Like I was losing my mind. Wind shoved against the shutter. A jolt of cold cut through the warmth. She gasped. Eyes wide. Her body braced for the door to swing open again. The cowboy stepped once toward the window. Checked the latch. Confirmed the barrier held. Confirming she could go on. She inhaled. Slow. Shaking. He made me believe I couldn't leave, she said. Every time I tried, he'd pull me back with a smile. A bitter laugh escaped her. Small. Hollow. He never raised his voice in public. Everyone thought he was a gentleman. She pressed her palms together. Hard. As if grounding herself against the past. I kept telling myself I could endure it. Her gaze fell to the floor. But when he came home with those papers, the one saying I wasn't capable of deciding my own life, she closed her eyes. I knew he was going to make it through. The cowboy inhaled slowly. A sound almost lost under the fire's crackle. She leaned back against the wooden wall. Tears streaking down. I didn't run because I'm crazy, she whispered. I ran because he was going to swallow me whole. Silence settled. Heavy. True. The kind of silence that came after a wound was finally named. The dog nudged her again. Soft. Steady. She placed her hand on his neck. Warm fur grounding her. Her voice steadied. He'll come back. It wasn't fear now. It was certainty. She looked up at the cowboy. Eyes raw. Unshielded. I know he will. The cowboy held her gaze. Long. Unflinching. Firelight glinted off the scars on his knuckles. He didn't offer false comfort. Didn't promise she was safe forever. Instead, he walked to the door. Checked the latch again. Then reached for his coat. Hung it on a peg near her cot. A quiet gesture. A choice. A promise shaped without words. I stay close. I stand between you and what hunts you. The fire burned warmer. The shadows retreated. Her breath eased. Just slightly. Her voice steadied enough for one last truth. Thank you, she whispered. Not because she was safe. Not yet. But because she had finally spoken. And someone had finally listened. Morning cracked open with a hard, unforgiving light. Cold seeped through every gap in the shutters. Not the drifting cold of a winter morning. The sharp, decisive cold of something coming. Something choosing its moment. The widow sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of warm broth. The dog lay beneath her feet, chin on her boot. Still. Alert. The cowboy stood by the fire, adding one more log, strengthening the warmth, fortifying the small world inside these walls. Then, Hoofbeats. Not distant this time. Close. Purposeful. A second pair followed. Then a third. Leather creaked. A saddle shifted. A voice called out. Official. Steel-edged. Open up. Her breath vanished. Cup rattling in her hands. The dog growled low, hair rising along his back. The cowboy stepped toward the door. Slow. Deliberate. He put himself between her and the sound. Between her and the past clawing its way toward the present. Another knock. Harder. No use hiding, a man called. The law's here. Time to hand her over. Her pulse hammered. She pressed back into the chair as if she could sink through it and disappear. A memory slammed into her. The antagonist's voice whispering threats behind a closed door. His hand on her jaw. His promise that no one would ever take her side. The cowboy unlatched the door. Opened it just enough to see. Cold blasted through the gap. 3 men sat on horseback. The antagonist. The sheriff. And the same deputy from before. The sheriff held papers. Legal. Stiff. His breath rose in white puffs. We're here for the woman, he said. Turn her over peaceably. The cowboy didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't yield so much as an inch. The antagonist smiled. Soft. Satisfied. Dressed in warmth while he sent cold spilling over others. I told you, he said to the sheriff. She's in danger. She fled during one of her episodes. He touched his coat dramatically. As her guardian, I'm obligated to bring her back. Guardian. The word scraped the widow's bones. She stood too fast. Chair legs squeaked across the floor. A jolt of fear shot through her. The dog barked, sharp and protective. The cowboy didn't turn, but his shoulders squared, creating an even wider barrier. The sheriff lifted the papers. These say she's unstable, he said. And signed under his care. The cowboy's voice came low. Flat. No. The sheriff frowned. You don't get to decide. She does, the cowboy answered. The antagonist scoffed. She can't make decisions. That's the point. He leaned forward in the saddle, peering past the cowboy. Darling, he called sweetly, come here now. Her breath seized. Her vision blurred at the edges. The memory rose. Him dragging her up a staircase. Her voice small. His smile bigger. The cowboy shifted enough to block her completely. No, he said again. The sheriff tried to push past. The cowboy stepped into his path. A silent wall. Unmoving. Unbreakable. This is obstruction, the sheriff warned. Step aside. The cowboy didn't. The antagonist smiled. You see? He said. Violent. Territorial. Dangerous. This man's manipulating her. He pointed at the cabin. At her. At all of this. The widow's fingers dug into the table. Cold encircled her chest. Choked her. She forced air into her lungs. Forced her voice up from where fear tried to bury it. I'm not unstable, she said. Her words brittle but alive. I'm not imagining anything. The men outside froze. The antagonist's smile faltered. Just a crack. The cowboy didn't turn, but she felt the steadiness of him like a beam holding a collapsing roof. She stepped forward. One trembling foot. Then another. Close enough that her voice reached the door. Clear enough. He hurt me. The antagonist stiffened. That's nonsense. She's lying. She's confused. The excuses tangled in the cold air. The cowboy raised one hand. Not aggressive. Just a quiet command for silence. The sheriff looked between them. Conflicted. But the papers in his hand carried weight. Ma'am, he said, the documents say you're under his care. Unless you have proof. Proof. The word cut through her fear like a blade through thick rope. She reached into her coat. hands shaking, pulled out the folded journal she'd carried for months, hidden from him, protected like a seed of truth. She held it tight, but didn't hand it over. Not yet. The antagonist's face drained of color. The cowboy's stance hardened. The air between all of them shifted, cold and warm colliding. "This isn't over," the sheriff said softly. "We'll have to settle this in town." He nodded at the deputy. "Fetch the wagon." The antagonist smiled again, victory in the corners of his eyes. "Good decision." The cowboy stepped fully outside, boots crunching in the snow, standing between her and the world. "No wagon," he said. "If she goes, I go." The sheriff stared. "That's not needed." "It is," the cowboy replied. 6 words. A vow. He closed the door behind him, leaving her in warmth while he faced the cold. The cabin trembled with the storm outside. The dog pressed against her legs. Her breath shook. But she didn't collapse. She had spoken. He had taken the stand. The law had come for her, and he had chosen to be the wall. The town gathered slow. Cold morning breath rising from every coat and collar. Snow crusted the church steps. Hard. Unforgiving. Inside, lanterns burned low. A reluctant warmth. Thin. Uneven. The townsfolk filled the pews with cautious curiosity. No one wanted trouble, but everyone smelled it. The cowboy stood at the front, silent, solid. The widow beside him, hands shaking in her repaired coat, her journal clutched tight against her chest. The dog lay at her feet, head lifted, watching every movement. The sheriff waited near the pulpit, hat in hand, face tight with uncertainty. The deputy hovered near the aisles. The charming monster strolled in last. Warm coat, easy smile, the kind of smile that convinced townspeople to lower their guard. He removed his gloves slowly, dramatically, as if he owned the air in the room. "Let's settle this," he said, voice rich as sweet wine. Murmurs rippled, warm breath mixing with cold tension. The sheriff cleared his throat. "All right," he said. "We're here to hear both sides." The antagonist stepped forward before anyone else could. "Simple matter," he began. "She's unwell, fragile, prone to wandering." He tapped his temple lightly, a gesture rehearsed, cruel beneath the softness. "I've looked after her for years." She ran in confusion. "And this man," he pointed at the cowboy, "has been misled by her stories." A stir of uneasy agreement moved through the crowd. The cowboy said nothing. Didn't he too? The widow flinched at the familiar performance. Her memory flickered. His hand on her wrist. His whisper in her ear. His voice tripping poison behind a polite smile. The sheriff nodded slowly. "You've brought affidavits," he said. The antagonist handed them over. Neat papers. Straight lines. A fish link. A weapon disguised as documentation. The sheriff skimmed. Brows tightening. Claims of hysteria. Claims of delusion. Claims of debts owed and care provided. Every word arranged to bind her like invisible rope. The townspeople murmured again. Cold suspicion drifting through warm lantern light. The cowboy looked at her. Only a slight tilt of his head. A silent invitation. "Now. If you choose." It took everything in her to step forward. Her knees trembled. Her vision blurred. But she did. Her voice barely audible. "I have something too." The room quieted. The antagonist's smile tightened. "What could you possibly have?" he crooned. She lifted the small, worn journal. Her hands shook. "I wrote everything," she said. "Every mark. Every lie. Every night I wasn't allowed to sleep. Every time he told me what I saw wasn't real." The room stilled. Close. Hot with attention. She opened the journal. Pages lined in cramped handwriting. Ink stained by tears. Pain pressed between thin sheets of paper. She turned one page, then another. Read just enough for the room to understand. Not too much. Not too little. Account stated. Repeated patterns. Cold nights locked outside. Warm apologies delivered later. Bruises sketched at the edges of the pages. The townsfolk leaned closer. Eyes widening. Whispers shifting tone. Someone in the back muttered, "That's not confusion." Someone else whispered, "That's fear." A storekeeper stepped forward. Nervous. Hands shaking. "I saw her once," he said. Buying bread. He grabbed her arm outside. Hard. Hard enough she dropped everything. She looked terrified. A neighbor stood next. Voice tight. Her window used to shake at night. Heard shouting. Thought it wasn't my place to ask. A woman from the livery stepped forward. "I stitched a cut on her shoulder months ago," she said softly. She said she'd fallen. But the shape. It looked like a hand. The antagonist's smile cracked. His mask slipped in the warm lantern light. He straightened. "You're all mistaken," he snapped. "She's manipulating you. She's good at that." The sheriff looked again at the papers in his hand. Then at the journal. Then at the bruises still visible along the widow's wrist. Then at the cowboy. Still quiet. Still steady. Still standing between her and every cold thing in the world. The sheriff exhaled. The sound heavy. Final. "How do you explain those marks?" he asked the antagonist. The room waited. Cold silence creeping into the spaces between warm breaths. The antagonist swallowed. "Accidents," he said. "Clumsiness. She doesn't remember clearly." "She remembers clearly now," the sheriff replied. He handed the journal to the deputy. "And this is evidence." The antagonist's face twisted. Something vicious flashed behind his eyes. He took one step toward the widow. The cowboy intercepted that step before it completed. A wall. A shield. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to send another man backward. The dog growled. Keith bared just enough to promise consequences. The sheriff stepped between them. "Enough," he said sharply. "Your papers were forged. Your claims false. The town won't stand behind your lies." The antagonist looked around. At the faces turning cold. At the lanterns flickering warm truth. At the cowboy standing unmovable. At the widow who finally met his gaze without flinching. "You can't do this," he whispered. The sheriff signaled the deputy. "Arrest him." Restraints clicked. The antagonist's breath fogged in frantic bursts. He fled. Denials spilling from his lips like melting snow. But the room no longer believed him. The crowd parted. Not for him. For justice. He was dragged toward the door. Cold swallowed him. Snow hissed beneath his boots. The door shut hard behind him. Warmth settled slowly across the church. A thaw. A long-awaited shift. The widow stood in the center. Trembling. Breathing. Alive. The cowboy stepped beside her. Not touching. Not claiming. Just there. Present. Rooted. She exhaled. Finally. A breath that belonged to her again. The town watched her. Not with doubt. With recognition. With apology on their faces. With belief in their eyes. Her truth had finally been heard. Her evidence finally seen. And the lie that hunted her. Broken. Publicly. Irreversibly. Warm lantern light flickered across her face. She closed her eyes. For the first time, the warmth reached her fully. No shadow followed. Snow melted in thin lines along the church roof by the time they stepped outside. Cold still clung to the edges of the world. But the sharp bite of danger was gone. Gone with the man dragged down the white road in cuffs. Gone with the lies that once chased her breath. The cowboy walked beside her. Silent. Present. The dog padded close, brushing her leg like a steady heartbeat. The townsfolk lingered in doorways, watching, ashamed of what they missed, warmed by what they finally corrected. Someone whispered her name. Soft. Respectful. She lowered her gaze. Not ready to meet their eyes. Not ready to feel seen in this new way. But the warmth from the sun, not strong, but honest, touched her cheeks. And she let herself breathe it in. They reached the horses. The sheriff nodded to her. A quiet apology wrapped in breath and cold morning air. She nodded back. No bitterness. No weight. Just release. The cowboy helped her mount. Slow, careful hands. Not claiming her. Just studying. They rode out of town. Snow crunching beneath hooves. Wind lifting loose strands of her hair. The dog trotted beside them, tongue lolling, tail flicking like a banner of victory. The valley opened wide, broad, vast. Winter still ruled the land, but its cruelty had softened. The sun pressed through thin clouds. A promise more than warmth. But it felt enough. They reached the cabin by dusk. Smoke curled from the chimney. A thin gray ribbon rising into the pale sky. Home. The word floated uninvited through her mind. She hesitated at the threshold. Cold breath pooling around her boots. The last time she stood here, she had collapsed. Broken. Frozen. Unsure she would ever rise again. The cowboy opened the door. Heat spilled out. Soft orange firelight washing across the floorboards. Familiar. Safe. He didn't step aside grandly. Just held the door in that silent way of his. The dog nudged her leg, as if giving permission. She crossed the threshold. Warmth wrapped her immediately. Fire crackling. Broth simmering. The faint scent of pine. The cowboy followed. Closed the door. Cold sealed out. Warmth locked in. Her breath loosened. She wandered toward the hearth. Set her hands near the flames. The heat spread up her arms. Slowed her heartbeat. Calmed the trembling that hadn't left since the trial. A soft sound, wind brushing against the shutters, made her flinch. Memory rose. His bootsteps. His voice. His shadow cutting light in half. The cowboy noticed. He stepped past her. Checked the window latches. Checked the door. Checked the pegs where his rifle hung. Not fear. Readiness. Assurance spoken through motion. She exhaled. A long breath. The tremor faded. He returned to the hearth. Placed another log into the fire. Flames climbed. Heat deepened. Warmth settling in layers around them. She sat on the rug. The dog curled into her lap without hesitation. She stroked his fur, slow, steady. Her brow softened. Her shoulders lowered. Piece by piece, the armor she wore dissolved. The cowboy pulled 2 bowls from the shelf. Filled them with stew. Strong. Simple. Warm. He handed one to her. Only after she reached for it did he sit. A small distance away. Respect held in every inch of space. The firelight shifted across his face, softening the stern lines. She watched him a moment. Watched the way he existed quietly. Power without noise. Comfort without possession. Safety without demand. Her breath shook again, but gently this time. Not fear. Release. She ate slowly. The warmth from the stew filled the hollows inside her. Hollows carved by years of walking on eggshells. Years of being told she imagined her own bruises. Years of trying to shrink enough to survive. Snow tapped the window. A reminder of the world outside. Cold. Vast. Uncertain. But no longer hunting her. The threat was gone. Yet the echo remained. She set her bowl down. Hands trembling. The cowboy looked up. Eyes steady. Open. She took a breath. "I'm free," she whispered. The words tasted unreal. Frightening. Hopeful. The cowboy nodded once. A slow acknowledgement of truth. A grounding weight. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. "I don't know what comes next." He stood. Walked to the stove. Poured warm tea into a tin cup. Placed it beside her. A small act. A simple one. But it answered everything she feared asking. What comes next is warmth. Not captivity. Not control. Not silence. Warmth. He sat back down. Close enough she felt his presence. Far enough she didn't feel claimed. The dog's tail thumped against her leg. She laughed softly. A sound that surprised her. A sound that shook loose the last ice clinging to her ribs. Night settled around the cabin. Deep. Quiet. Stars pressed against the windows with cold brilliance. Inside, fire warmed every corner. The cowboy rose once more. Checked the door again. Checked the shutters. Checked the shadows. Habit. Devotion. Promise. She watched him. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. Didn't feel like something broken needing rescue. She felt kept. Not by possession. By choice. By presence. By a man who fought in silence and protected in action. She lay down on the cot. The dog curled at her side. The cowboy settled near the door. Bedroll spread. Guarding without being asked. Guarding because it was who he was. Her eyes closed. Warmth spread through her chest. Slow. Steady. Complete. The storm whispered against the eaves. But it no longer sounded like a threat. Just weather. Just winter. She drifted toward sleep. The fire crackled. The dog sighed. The cowboy kept watch. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep in a sanctuary built not of walls, but of warmth returned for good. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.